Welcome to my channel. I hope you get something out of today's painting. I'm not sure, I think it's not one of my best, I've got to be honest, but I do think there are things you can learn from it. So I thought I'd show it to you anyway, and please don't write anything rude in the comments. I thought I'd show you how I paint a bramble, and I think of a bramble as a small rose when it comes to the flowers. And the thing I did wrong right off the bat was I didn't choose a small enough brush to do these flowers, and they just did not turn out as nicely as they could have. And so, but the berries turned out very nicely, so you will get something from those. I show you how I do the berries. Here's my palette of titanium white, primary yellow, raw sienna, raw umber, French ultramarine blue, sap green, and alizarin crimson. For my brushes, I used a 3/4 inch flat, a liner brush, a 1/2 inch flat, and a small round. I should have changed the small round for a smaller flat because the round was useless in this case. I don't think I used it even. I wanted to show you that you can use acrylics on watercolor paper quite easily. You have to tape the paper to a board before you put it on your easel, and that's what I did. I did my sketch on top of my background, which I used cobalt blue to paint, and I don't like cobalt blue for background. I should have used my usual French ultramarine blue with titanium white for a mixture, and I think it would have looked better. I think the cobalt is just too strong a color. I got my drawing board from an art store, and I think it's called balsa wood. It's very, very light. It's not heavy like this size of a panel should be. It's much lighter wood than regular wood, so I don't really recommend going to the home hardware store unless they sell balsa wood, and then you could get something cut to a convenient size. I'm going to say right up front, the berries, leaves and stems are not bad. Don't look at the flowers. For the flowers, watch one of my other videos where I'm painting roses. That should help. I'm using a liner brush to paint the stems with raw sienna, and that's only one of the colors that I'll put on there. I'll probably put on alizarin crimson to give it a little punch, or French ultramarine blue, which is a transparent paint and makes a lovely shadow on stems. And I'll put on a highlight, alizarin crimson and primary yellow mixed together with a little titanium white. That gives a good highlight color to a stem, and we'll see how it goes. I try and get as much color as I can into a stem because I want to make everything in my painting interesting to look at. I'm using my 1/2 inch flat and a mid-tone green to put a blob where the leaves will be. You don't have to put the brush stroke in at this point, you just need a blob to indicate that there's a leaf in that place. The brush stroke is important when you're adding shadow and highlight. I've got 11 leaves, I think. I like to paint things in odd numbers, 3 roses, 7 or 9 or 11 leaves, because an odd number is more charming, more interesting to the eye. So my teacher told me, and I've always agreed with that. So that's how I do it. Now you might feel differently about this, and if you do, just go ahead and put in the number of leaves you'd like to see. Well, I did use the round, and I shouldn't have used the round. I should have used a smaller flat to paint these little flowers, which are very rose-like in manner. And I feel that you will get more out of watching one of my rose videos when it comes to painting these blackberry flowers. That's really all I can say about it. Just don't watch this bit. I didn't cut it out because it's part of the video it shows you when I paint the flowers, if nothing else, and I'm okay with showing my mistakes. I think you can learn something from it. I do a sideways swipe for the petal where we don't see the entire flower, where we see it in profile. And is there anything else interesting? I think the centers are quite interesting. I dot those in with the point of the round, and I do that with alizarin crimson and a little raw sienna, I think. It depends on how I feel that day, to be honest. For the blackberries, I mix French ultramarine blue and raw umber, which makes a good solid black. And here's an interesting fact. If you need a series of greys, these are the two colors to mix together, and then add titanium white to that, according to how deep you need your shade of gray. And you can get quite a good series of greys using those three colors. I use a Q-tip to make the blackberries. I've found that works better than using a round brush. You get quite a precise circle if you use a Q-tip, the tip of it. And then you dot on straight white to give you a highlight. And I think that makes quite an effective berry. I don't do all the berries dark. I use some alizarin crimson for some of the berries, because you always get those berries that haven't quite ripened, don't you, on a blackberry bush. And so a couple of my berries will be red. Again, I do an odd number of berries, keeping it interesting, just throwing your eye off a little bit, doing those odd things in a painting that make it more fun to look at. I've decided the light is coming from the right, so everything on the right hand side will be highlighted and everything on the left hand side will be in shadow, and some things will overhang. A blossom will overhang a leaf or part of the stem, and those parts will be in shadow as well. Here I'm reinforcing my stem. I can't tell what color I'm using, but I used those three colors, French ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, and raw sienna for the base color of the stem. I usually use raw sienna. Sometimes I use sap green, but mostly I use raw sienna because I'm painting a woody stem, and they are actually that sort of dark brownish color, sort of brackeny. I don't know, maybe that's not the correct word, but anyway, you can reinforce it with other colors. You can get quite exciting, really, if you've got some colors you've bought that you want to try out. That's the place to do it, on stems and leaves, and little tiny patches of color will just spark up that painting no end. Here I'm mixing up a shadow colour for the leaves. I've put French ultramarine blue into the sap green. That gives me a nice dark green. And here's where the brush stroke comes in. You pull that stroke in from the outer edge toward the center vein. I have not put center veins in at this point, but where you know the center vein will be, I'm going to leave it up to you to think about that. Where will your center vein be? That's where your brush stroke needs to go. I'm trusting you on this. This is what gives you that sort of lobe effect, and you hardly need to put in vein lines. You can leave those out depending on how heavy your brush stroke is. You can practice this and see if you can't make an indication of veins without actually putting veins in as separate lines. It's all part of the technique. Using titanium white and primary yellow, I'm mixing a lighter green, a paler shade of green for the leaves. I find it helpful to give myself a break when it comes to highlight and shadow. I like to pause, stand back, and decide where those highlights and shadows should be. It's not always immediately obvious when you're painting, if you're painting too quickly, that is. And sometimes you just need to give yourself a break in order to make those decisions. I actually used a liner brush to put in the centers of the flowers, and I use alizarin crimson, and I usually mix up an orange for a highlight on those, or sometimes I go a little bit darker and let the alizarin be the highlight. It all depends how I'm feeling, and you'll make that decision for yourself. But those are the colors that I use: alizarin, raw sienna sometimes. I make an orange out of alizarin and primary yellow, and those three are usually my highlight and shadow in the centers for the center stamens. I'm using a Q-tip to put in tiny dots of titanium white on my berries. I just put 2 or 3 on each berry. I don't dot every single little circle, just 2 or 3 on each berry, and they might look too bright at first, but the brand of paint I use dries down a darker color, but you can go over it a little bit. It just depends. You just have to wait and see. It's all about watching paint dry. I usually do put in a center vein and a couple of others with alizarin crimson, because I think it helps punch up my painting a little bit. You have to make that choice. Are you going to use a green, a raw sienna, an alizarin crimson? You have to make that choice. It's what makes your painting yours. And you have to make a choice of how many of these lines you're going to put in, because they can take over a painting. So I advise you to be very careful about that. I did put in a few squiggly lines just to represent those twiggy bits that you get on a berry plant. The ones with no leaves, they're a bit dried up and died off and haven't quite fallen. Those things. I really have finished the painting at this point, and I'm just messing around, adding a few more bits here and there, and I have to warn you against that too, because you can overwork a painting by going in and dabbing here and there, and adding more than you need to. It can take the freshness of the painting away and leave you with something that looks overworked and wooden. Here's where I mixed up a pale rose colour and I'm trying to adjust those petals, and I didn't have much luck. I'm not happy with these flowers at all. I want you to ignore them. Just concentrate on the berries and the leaves. They're much better. Well, that's it for Blackberry. I hope you got something from this video. Don't look at the flowers. I keep telling you that, but I really mean it. They're not my best flowers, and I want you to go to my rose videos and paint the berry flowers just like miniature roses, and they'll look much better, believe me. And I think the berries turned out well, and I'm not too bad about the leaves. The leaves are okay. So I'll see you next time. Please like, share and subscribe. That helps my channel grow. It doesn't cost you anything and nobody bugs you. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.